was years ago, but even now, I can still remember the exact feeling of that night. Not just what happened, but how it felt. The kind of feeling that stays with you long after the details should have faded. The kind that shows up randomly late at night when everything is quiet and your mind decides to revisit things you never really processed. Back then, though, it didn't feel like anything important. It just felt like a normal night. Me and my date had planned it like any other casual evening. Nothing fancy, nothing special. We weren't celebrating anything. No verdades, no anniversaries. Just one of those nights where you don't want to sit at home, so you go somewhere familiar, somewhere predictable. That bar was exactly that. It wasn't the best place in the city. It wasn't the worst either. It sat somewhere in between, the kind of place that had its own regular crowd. People who came there not because it was exciting, but because it was comfortable. The lighting was always a little dim, the music just loud enough to fill silence but not loud enough to stop conversations. The kind of place where time moved slowly. We had been going there long enough that the bartender recognized us, even if we didn't know his name. He would just nod when we walked in, already knowing what we were going to order. That night was no different. We walked in, took our usual spot, ordered our drinks, and settled into that familiar rhythm. For the first 30 minutes or so, nothing stood out. People laughed. Someone dropped a glass. Music changed tracks. Conversations overlapped. It was exactly what you would expect. If we had left right then, nothing would have happened. That thought stayed with me later. How close we were to missing everything. I remember watching the door without really paying attention to it. Just one of those unconscious habits you develop when you sit facing the entrance. You don't mean to watch people, but you notice when someone new walks in. And then the door opened. First, nothing seemed unusual. Just a group of guys walking in. But within a few seconds, something about them started to feel off. Not dangerous. Not yet. Just loud. Even before they said anything, you could tell they were the kind of people who didn't blend into a place. They stood out without trying. The way they walked, the way they looked around, the way they carried themselves, it all felt like they expected attention. There were about 5 or 6 of them. Clean clothes, expensive-looking watches, confident posture. The kind of confidence that doesn't come from experience, but from always getting away with things. At first, they just took a table near the center. But it didn't stay just that for long. Within minutes, their voices started rising above everyone else. Not naturally, intentionally, like they needed to be heard. They laughed louder than the joke deserved, talked over each other, called the bartender in a way that felt more like a command than a request. It wasn't aggressive yet, but it wasn't respectful either. And that's usually how these things start. Small, annoying, easy to ignore. I remember my date glancing at them once, then looking back at me without saying anything. That look people give when they're noticing something but don't want to make it a topic. We both knew the type. Everyone does. The kind of people who test boundaries just to see how far they can go. First, it was just comments. Talking to people at nearby tables who clearly didn't want to be part of the conversation. Leaning too close. Laughing when someone didn't respond. Making it awkward on purpose. And still, nobody said anything. Not because they were okay with it, but because people usually choose peace over confrontation, especially when alcohol is involved. After a while, the energy in the room started to shift. Subtle at first. You don't notice it immediately. Conversations get shorter. People start paying more attention to their surroundings. Some finish their drinks faster than usual. And slowly, without making it obvious, people start moving away. We did the same thing. We picked up our drinks and shifted to a table further along the wall. No discussion, no announcement, just a quiet decision. It wasn't fear, not yet, just awareness. Time passed, but not in the same way it had before. Now every few minutes, something would happen. A raised voice, a sarcastic comment, a forced laugh. Little sparks that didn't turn into anything, but felt like they could. And every time it happened, the room would tighten slightly, like everyone was waiting for the moment it would go too far. If the night had continued like that, maybe nothing serious would have happened. Maybe they would have gotten bored and left. Maybe someone would have stepped in before things escalated. Maybe it would have just been another annoying group that people complained about later. But then the door opened again, and that's when everything changed. This time there was no noise, no loud entrance, no attempt to grab attention. Just a group of men walking in calmly, like they didn't need to prove anything to anyone. You could tell immediately they were different, not because of how they looked, but because of how they didn't react. They didn't scan the room like they owned it. They didn't try to dominate the space. They just existed in it. And somehow that made their presence heavier than anyone else's. I noticed them before my date did. Then I saw her expression change slightly when she realized it too. There's a certain kind of silence that isn't peaceful. It's the kind that carries weight. That's what it felt like when they walked in. They took a spot not too far from the other group. Not close enough to interact immediately, but close enough that ignoring each other wasn't really possible. And just like that, the atmosphere shifted again. Now it wasn't just one disruptive force in the room. It was two completely different kinds of energy, existing side by side. One loud, unpredictable, constantly pushing for attention. The other quiet, controlled, and impossible to read. And somehow, that second one felt far more dangerous. From the moment those bikers walked in, something in the room stopped feeling normal. It wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. But it was there. You could feel it sitting in the background, like a low hum that never fully went away. First, nothing actually happened. Both groups stayed where they were. The loud guys kept doing what they had been doing all night. Talking, laughing, pushing boundaries like the room belonged to them. But there was a slight change now. It wasn't as careless as before. It was almost like they were trying a little harder, like they needed to prove something. And the bikers? They didn't react. Not even once. They just sat there, calm, quiet, talking among themselves in low voices. No sudden movements. No interest in what was happening across the room. But that didn't make things better. If anything, it made it worse, because now the tension had direction. I remember noticing how people in the bar started paying attention without trying to look like they were paying attention. Glances that lasted a second too long. Conversations that kept getting interrupted. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone could feel it. Something was building. The loud group started getting more restless. You could see it in the way they moved, the way their laughter became sharper, more forced. One of them kept looking over at the bikers again and again, like he was waiting for a reaction that never came. That kind of silence, it bothers people like that. When someone doesn't respond, doesn't engage, doesn't acknowledge them, it feels like disrespect. And people who are used to attention don't handle that well. The one who stood out the most, the one I kept noticing, was the guy in the white shirt. He wasn't the biggest in the group, but everything about him screamed that he thought he was in charge. The way he stood, the way the others looked at him before making decisions, the way he talked like everything he said mattered more than anything anyone else said. He had that energy, the kind that doesn't just want attention. It expects it. At one point, he leaned back in his chair and said something to his group that made them all laugh. But his eyes weren't on them. They were on the bikers. That's when I felt it. That small shift. The moment where something stops being random and starts becoming intentional. My date leaned slightly toward me and quietly asked if we should just leave. Not in a panicked way, just casually, like suggesting we try another place. And honestly, we probably should have. But there's this strange thing people do when nothing has happened yet. You convince yourself it's not serious. You tell yourself you're overthinking. You stay because leaving feels unnecessary. So we stayed, and the night kept moving forward. Drinks kept coming. Voices kept rising. And that invisible line between the two groups kept getting thinner. The first real moment came quietly. So quietly that most people probably didn't even notice it. But I did, because I was already watching. One of the loud guys, not the one in charge but close enough, stood up and walked toward the bar. Nothing unusual about that, except he didn't stop at the bar. He slowed down as he got closer to the biker's table. Just enough to notice. Just enough to make it feel intentional. He said something. I couldn't hear what it was, but I saw the reaction. or more accurately, the lack of one. The biker he was closest to didn't even look up, didn't respond, didn't acknowledge him at all. For a second, the guy just stood there, waiting, expecting something, anything. When nothing came, he laughed. But it wasn't a real laugh. It was the kind people use when they don't know what else to do. Then he turned and walked back to his group, back to the noise. But something had changed, even if no one said it, even if nothing official had happened. That was the first move. And once something like that happens, it rarely stops there. A few minutes passed, then 10, then maybe 15. Time started feeling strange, like everything was stretching out longer than it should. The loud group got louder again, but now it felt forced, like they were trying to reset the energy, trying to take back control of the room. And the bikers? Still the same, calm, quiet, untouched by any of it. That's when the guy in the white shirt stood up. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't aggressive. He just stood, adjusted his shirt, looked around, and then started walking. Not toward the bar, not toward the exit, toward them. I remember the exact moment my chest tightened, because something about the way he moved made it clear. This wasn't accidental. His friends noticed too. One of them said something. Another one reached out slightly, like he might stop him. But no one actually did, because they all thought the same thing he did. That this was just another moment, another interaction, another chance to show dominance. He walked straight up to one of the bikers, the same one from before, stopped just a little too close, said something. Again, I couldn't hear the words, but I could see his expression. That same half smile, that same look people have when they think they're in control of a situation. One of his friends finally stepped in, put a hand on his arm, pulled him back slightly, not forcefully, just enough to say, "That's enough." And for a second, it almost worked. But then he resisted, just a little, not enough to start a fight, but enough to make a statement. And in that moment, everything became clear. He thought this was a game. He thought this was like every other interaction he had that night. Push a little, get a reaction, walk away feeling like he won something. But the person standing in front of him wasn't playing the same game. The biker didn't move, didn't speak, didn't react. He just stood there, completely still, looking at him like he wasn't even worth acknowledging. That kind of stillness, it does something to people. It either makes them back off, or it pushes them further. And for a second, it looked like he might back off. His friend pulled him again, this time a little more firmly. And finally, he stepped back. He laughed, shook his head, said something to his group as he walked back. Like it didn't matter, like it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing, because while all of that was happening, I noticed something else, something small, but important. Two of the bikers had shifted slightly in their seats. Not enough for most people to notice, but enough that I saw it. Their hands had moved inside their jackets. Not quickly, not aggressively, just ready. And another one had quietly moved closer to the door, standing there, not blocking it completely, but enough that leaving quickly wouldn't be easy. That's when the realization hit me fully. This wasn't tension anymore. This was preparation. By that point, it didn't feel like a normal night anymore. It felt like something was waiting to happen. Not maybe, not possibly. I mean, something that was going to happen, no matter what. And the worst part was, almost everyone in that room could feel it, but nobody was doing anything about it. People were still sitting, still drinking, still pretending everything was fine. That's the strange thing about situations like that. As long as nothing has actually happened yet, people convince themselves it won't. After that second interaction, things got quieter for a while. Not completely quiet, but different. The loud group pulled back slightly, like they were regrouping, talking among themselves, laughing again, but now it felt forced, like they were trying to reset the mood, trying to prove they still controlled the energy of the room. But they didn't. Not anymore. The bikers hadn't moved much at all. They were still sitting there, calm, steady, like nothing around them mattered. But now that I had noticed those small movements, the hands inside jackets, the positioning near the door, I couldn't unsee it. Everything they were doing now felt deliberate, measured, controlled. I leaned slightly toward my date and quietly said that we should probably leave. This time, it wasn't casual. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a decision. She didn't argue. She didn't even hesitate. She just nodded. We both finished what was left of our drinks, slower than usual, trying not to draw attention. There's a certain way people leave when they don't want to be noticed. No sudden movements, no urgency. Just calm, controlled steps. We stood up and started moving toward the exit. As we walked, I could feel my awareness sharpening. Every sound felt clearer, every movement more noticeable. It's strange how your body reacts before your mind fully catches up. Like some part of you already knows you're in the wrong place. We were halfway to the door when I heard laughter behind us. Louder than before, sharpened. The kind of laugh that isn't really about humor. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to, but I could feel it. Something was shifting again. We kept walking, closer to the door, closer to getting out. And then we made it. We stepped outside. The air felt different immediately, cooler, quieter, like stepping out of pressure without realizing how heavy it had been inside. For a moment, it felt like we had escaped something, like whatever was going to happen was no longer our problem. We started walking toward the car, and that's when we ran into her, a friend, or at least someone we knew well enough not to ignore. She was leaning against a car, barely standing, her eyes unfocused, her balance completely gone. She tried to say something when she saw us, but the words didn't come out right. I remember looking back at the bar for a second, just a quick glance. The door was still closed, everything still contained inside. We could have left, we should have left, but we didn't. We helped her into the car. It wasn't easy. She could barely walk, barely support her own weight. It took both of us to get her into the back seat without her falling. She kept mumbling something, words blending together, completely unaware of what was happening around her. Once she was in, we got into the front, started the car, pulled away. For a few minutes, everything felt normal again. Just driving, just focusing on the road, trying not to think about what we had just left behind. We dropped her off at her place, made sure she got inside safely, waited until the door closed, and for a moment, that felt like the end of it. But it wasn't. On the way back, we had to pass the bar again. There wasn't another route that made sense. So we drove the same way. And as we got closer, I noticed something immediately. Lights, movement, more people than before. There was a crowd outside. Not huge, but enough. Enough to know something had happened. I slowed down slightly as we passed, both of us looking without saying anything. And there they were, both groups, outside now, facing each other. Whatever had been building inside had moved out into the open. My date broke the silence first. She looked at me and said, almost casually, "You want to watch?" I should have said no. I knew I should have, but there's something about moments like that. That pull, that curiosity, that feeling that you're about to witness something important. So I slowed the car, pulled over just enough to see clearly. First, it didn't look like much. Just people standing, talking louder than they should, pointing, posturing. The kind of scene you've probably seen before, where it looks like it might turn into something, but might also just fade out. But something felt different. Nobody was backing down. The loud group was still acting like they owned the situation, gesturing aggressively, talking over each other, trying to dominate the space the same way they had inside. But the bikers, they weren't reacting the same way. They weren't loud. They weren't chaotic. They were focused, standing in a way that didn't leave gaps, positioned in a way that made it clear they were aware of everything around them. It didn't feel like an argument. It felt like something waiting for a signal. Time stretched. Seconds felt longer than they should. Voices overlapped. Someone stepped forward. Someone else pushed back. And then it happened. A single punch. Quick, sudden, no warning. And just like that, everything exploded. People started moving all at once. Shouting, shoving, trying to hit, trying to block, trying to react faster than the next person. It wasn't controlled. It wasn't organized. It was chaos. And in the middle of that chaos, everything started to blur together. But then something cut through it. A voice. Hi. Sharp. Someone shouting. I focused on where it was coming from. And that's when I saw her. One of the biker's girlfriends. She stepped in between them, right into the middle of everything, trying to stop it. She stepped in between them like she believed she could stop it. Like raising her voice would be enough. Like this was still something that could be controlled. For a brief second, it almost worked. The movement slowed just a little. Not completely, but enough that you could feel a shift. A hesitation. Like people suddenly became aware of what was happening. She was shouting, trying to push them apart, her hands out, her voice cutting through the noise. And for that moment, it felt like maybe everything would just settle. But moments like that don't last. Not when things have already gone too far. The guy in the white shirt turned toward her. First, it didn't look like anything. Just another reaction. Just another movement in the chaos. But then he hit her. Hard. There was no hesitation. No pause. No moment where he realized what he was doing. It wasn't a shove. It wasn't a push. It was a full strike. She stumbled but didn't fall. Tried to say something again. Tried to keep standing between them. And he hit her again. This time harder. Everything around them started to blur. But that moment stayed sharp. Clear. He kept going. And that's when something changed in the air. It stopped being a fight. Stopped being chaos. And became something else. Something heavier. Something wrong. She stopped reacting the way a person normally would. Her movements slowed. Her voice disappeared. But he didn't stop. He grabbed her, holding her up like she weighed nothing. Like she wasn't even there anymore. And he kept hitting her. There was no anger on his face anymore. No expression at all. Just movement. Around him, everything else faded. People were still shouting, still moving, but none of it mattered in that moment. Because what was happening right there wasn't something you could look away from. And then the lights appeared. Headlights. A car entered the parking lot fast. Too fast for what was happening. Too fast to react properly. For a split second, everything seemed to freeze. Like the entire scene paused just long enough for something irreversible to happen. He saw the car. And in that moment, he made a choice. He threw her. Not pushed. Not dropped. Thrown. Right into its path. The car didn't have time. There was no braking distance. No chance to avoid it. The impact wasn't loud. Not in the way you expect. It was worse. A dull, heavy sound that didn't match what everyone was seeing. Everything after that broke apart. Screaming. People running. Someone shouting something I couldn't fully hear. The driver yelling. Panic spreading in every direction. And right in the middle of it, someone screamed to get in the car. The guy in the white shirt turned. Like he was about to respond. Like he still thought he was part of something he controlled. He opened his mouth. But he never finished. Because the man he had confronted earlier, the one who never reacted, the one who stood still the entire time, finally moved. It happened so fast it almost didn't feel real. 1 second he was standing there. The next, there was a blade. No warning. No build-up. No hesitation. Just one clean motion. Precise. Direct. Final. Everything slowed down again. But this time, it didn't pause. It dragged. The guy in the white shirt froze. Like his body hadn't understood what just happened yet. For a second, nothing changed. Then it did. The color spread fast. Too fast. His expression shifted. Confusion first. Then something else. And then, nothing. Around him, people started moving again. Backing away. Creating space. No one stepped forward. No one tried to stop anything. Because in that moment, everyone understood. This wasn't a fight anymore. It was over. I didn't realize when my hands tightened on the wheel. Didn't realize how fast my breathing had gotten. All I knew was, we needed to leave. Now, I pressed the gas. Hard. The car moved before I fully thought about it, before I made a conscious decision. We pulled away fast, faster than we should have. I didn't look back immediately, couldn't. But when I did, just for a second, I saw him, standing there for a moment, before he wasn't. And that white shirt was no longer white. We drove through a red light without stopping. Didn't check for traffic. Didn't think about anything except distance. The farther we got, the quieter everything became. Until finally, there was nothing. Just the sound of the engine. And our breathing. We didn't talk for a long time. Not because we didn't have anything to say, but because there were no words that fit. When we finally did, it was simple. We both knew. Some things are not meant to be followed up. Not meant to be reported. Not meant to be revisited. Not because they don't matter, but because getting involved pulls you into something you don't come back from the same way. A few days later, the story appeared. In the news, they talked about him like he was a victim, a good person, someone who didn't deserve what happened. There were pictures, smiling ones, the kind people choose when they want to remember someone in the best way possible. There were flowers where it happened, candles, people gathering, talking about loss. But that wasn't the full story, not even close. And I knew that, because I was there. I saw how it started. I saw how it escalated. I saw the moment everything crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. And still, I said nothing. I told one person, my brother. He said I should come forward, that it mattered, that the truth should be known. Maybe he's right. But the place where this happened, it doesn't work like that. Things like this don't get fixed. They don't get resolved. They just become stories. Stories people tell differently. Stories people reshape. Stories people choose to remember in ways that make them feel better. But not all stories are meant to be shared. Some stay with you, quiet, heavy, unfinished. And no matter how much time passes, they don't really leave. That night didn't end when we drove away. It just stopped being something we could see and turned into something we carry. Some nights, you walk away from danger, and some nights, you walk away with something you'll never be able to fully explain. That night was both.